Baal was the name of the god who was worshipped throughout Canaan and Phoenicia in ancient times. During the Judges period, the practice of Baal worship entered Jewish religious life. Judges, chapter 3, verse 7, NIV. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God, and served the Baals and the Asherahs. The practice of Baal worship became widespread in Israel during the reign of Ahab. 1 Kings, chapter 16, verses 31 through 33, NLT. And as though it were not enough to follow the sinful example of Jeroboam, he married Jezebel, the daughter of King Ethbaal of the Sidonians, and he began to bow down in worship of Baal. First, Ahab built a temple and an altar for Baal in Samaria. Then he set up an Asherah pole. He did more to provoke the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than any of the other kings of Israel before him. And the practice of Baal worship also affected Judah. 2 Chronicles chapter 28, verses 1 through 4, NIV. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel, and also made idols for worshiping the Baals. He burned sacrifices in the valley of Ben Hinnom, and sacrificed his children in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on the hilltops, and under every spreading tree. The plural of the word Baal is Baalim, which means Lord. Baal was a fertility god who was thought to help the earth produce crops and people produce offspring in general. Various parts worshipped Baal in different methods, and Baal proved to be a highly universal god. Various locales highlighted one or another of his attributes and designed special sects of Baalism. Baal of Peor, as we see in Numbers chapter 25, verse 3, and Baal Berith, as we see in Judges chapter 8, verse 33, are two examples of such localized deities. Numbers chapter 25, verse 3. In this way, Israel joined in the worship of Baal of Peor, causing the Lord's anger to blaze against his people. Judges chapter 8, verse 33. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal Berith as their god. The word Baal appears infrequently in the Old Testament as a personal name. The word's etymology shows that Baal was considered as the owner of a certain location, thereby limiting its use to individuals who were no longer nomads but had settled down. These local Baals were thought to be in charge of agriculture, creatures, and humanity's fertility. It was crucial to win their favor, especially in a place like Pal, where there are few natural streams or springs, and rainfall is unpredictable. This led to the adoption of extreme forms in the cultus, including the practice of ritual prostitution and child sacrifice. Judges chapter 2, verse 17, New King James Version. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but they played the harlot with other gods and bowed down to them. They turned quickly from the way in which their fathers walked, in obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do so. Amos chapter 10, verse 7, New King James Version. They pant after the dust of the earth, which is on the head of the poor, and pervert the way of the humble. A man and his father go into the same girl to defile my holy name. Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 9, New King James Version. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, burn incense to Baal, and walk after other gods whom you do not know? The most meaningful use of the title in the Old Testament is its reference to the great active god of the Canaanite pantheon. An equation with Hadad, the Amorite god, whose nature and functions were almost identical, seems clear. Baal eventually ascended to the position of preeminent deity in the region. Part of this process, according to some researchers, can be traced back to the Ugaritic scriptures. Baal is identified as the son of Dagon, another Amorite deity, possibly a vegetation or grain god, rather than El, who was undoubtedly the original head of the Canaanite gods. At Ras Shamra, the ancient Ugarit site, temples to Baal and Dagon have been uncovered, but none devoted to El himself. Baal is depicted in the scriptures wearing a helmet, embellished with a bull's horns, a symbol of strength and fertility. He holds a club or mace in one hand, probably representing thunder, and a spear adorned with leaves in the other, possibly representing both lightning and vegetation. In Aramaean sculptures, Baal is depicted riding a bull, which may be related to Aaron and Jeroboam I's calf images, which were most likely used as pedestals for the invisible Yahweh. Anath, referred to euphemistically as the Virgin Anath, was Baal's spouse and sister, and shared many of his escapades. The Day of the Lord may have originated as a celebration of Yahweh's victory over the forces of chaos, presumably at the New Year festival in the Jerusalem Temple, in a rite derived from a Canaanite predecessor. There is evidence that Baal and other Canaanite deities were worshipped in Egypt, but without becoming a serious threat to the native Egyptian religion. The situation was different in Israel, where, through the processes of syncretism, the worship of Yahweh was profoundly influenced and threatened by alien elements from the Baal cults. This was due to two main factors. First, the Israelites did not drive out the Canaanites, but intermarried with them, thus raising the problem of the interrelationship of Yahweh and Baal. Second, Yahweh had given Israel a considerable victory over the Canaanites, and his supremacy was unquestioned. Baal was considered the most powerful of all gods, eclipsing El, who was seen as rather weak and ineffective. In various battles, Baal defeated Yam, the god of the sea, and Mot, the god of death and the underworld. Baal's sisters, or consorts, were Ashtoreth, a fertility goddess associated with the stars, and Anath, a goddess of love and war. The Canaanites worshipped Baal as the sun god and as the storm god. He is usually depicted holding a lightning bolt, who defeated enemies and produced crops. They also worshipped him as a fertility god who provided children. Baal worship was rooted in sensuality and involved ritualistic prostitution in the temples. At times, appeasing Baal required human sacrifice, usually the firstborn of the one making the sacrifice. Jeremiah chapter 19, verse 5, KJV. They have built also the high places of Baal, to burn their sons with fire for burnt offerings unto Baal, which I commanded not, nor spake it, neither came it into my mind. Baal's priests worshipped their deity with riotous rites that featured ecstatic shouts and self-inflicted harm. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 28. So the prophets prayed louder and cut themselves with knives and daggers, according to their ritual, until blood flowed. Before the Hebrews entered the Promised Land, the Lord God forewarned against glorifying Canaan's gods, but Israel bent to idolism anyway. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 14 through 15, King James Version. Ye shall not go after other gods, of the gods of the people which are round about you. For the Lord thy God is a jealous God among you, lest the anger of the Lord thy God be kindled against thee, and destroy thee from off the face of the earth.